and welcome to World Talks. My name is Sasha Farbach. Now, as EU leaders meet in Brussels for the June European Council, they face a moment of reflection and recalibration, addressing defense, migration, and geopolitical tensions in Ukraine and the Middle East. Now, coming just after the NATO summit in The Hague, the discussions will reveal how the Union positions itself in a rapidly shifting global landscape. Now, to help us unpack the substance behind the statements and the strategy behind the headlines, we're joined now in the studio by Piotr Maciej Kaczyński, University of Warsaw, European Institute of Public Administration. Welcome, good to have you back.
Good to be back. Good morning.
So Piotr, you're the man who knows, so tell us, we have all these different types of discussions. We have topics like defense, migration, the Middle East. So where are we going to get the most tangible things out of this council with all these European heads of state meeting?
Right. I mean, the agenda is super packed, right? Mm-hmm. It looks like super packed, but they are meeting only for one day. So effectively what's going on is that we have a meeting, and right now this is a very maybe important but not super important meeting out there, because the super important meeting was earlier this week in The Hague, when NATO took this very important decision about 5%. So right now EU leaders are meeting to streamline this effect, what is going on, because I would say that we need to stop talking about that the EU need to do something more. EU is doing more. If you look at the numbers from 2021, 2022, 3, 4, 5, we are spending so much more money for defense already, and we will spend even more in the future. But it's not that we are starting now. We already started that process.
I mean, you talk about defense as well. I mean, we have this now push, the 5%, that's NATO members. Not every EU member state is a NATO member. But do you think this will have any bearing? Is it, their spending already is happening, but how is that going to impact the topic of defense, rearming EU, the 800, 900 billion that the EU has set out to spend over the next few years?
Right. It's not about how much EU will spend on defense per se, though there is this issue as well. There's the issue of the next European budget, post-2027, so 2028 forward. Will there be a big defense, like a budget to be spent from the EU budget or not? And those talks about the next budget is starting also right now in June. But the biggest impact about defense topics is about coordination. How will we coordinate ourselves to spend those money for us, not only for the Polish security, German security, French security, but for the European security. So, for example, if we are buying new jets, if we are buying new tanks, are we talking with each other, that they are cooperating between each other? Our service people, can they drive the same tanks or not? We are seeing what's going on in Ukraine, right? Ukrainian pilots, they needed to be trained for F-16, for Mirage, for the Soviet planes before that. So, you know, those small issues are actually very important issues as well.
I know this is a different beast here, but at the same time, I couldn't help but notice if we look at the NATO conclusions and declaration, there was hardly, first of all, it was much shorter than the other ones from Washington, Vilnius, and also the text on Ukraine, really, really limited. So how do you see this play out? Do you think now, I mean, the European Union has been such a champion of Ukraine. Do you see now more of that maybe being pushed out? Will we hear anything concrete at this next summit in Ukraine?
Oh, Ukraine is definitely there for the Europeans. Europeans don't know how to tackle the big issue out there, which is Ukrainian membership in the Union. And this is a question that has been postponed and postponed and postponed. But everybody tells me in Brussels that this European Union cannot absorb Ukraine post-war because Ukraine is just too big. Its economy, its agriculture, the reconstruction post-war, it's too big of a hassle that we cannot handle with just 1% of our GDP to be able to finance that country.
But that sounds very different to what we heard from Ursula von der Leyen, from other European politicians about fast-track membership for Ukraine. So that's not happening.
Actually, if we are talking 2025, if the Union is really serious about fast-tracking any enlargement, including Ukraine, we need to look somewhere else because Albania and Montenegro are two countries right now that are on a super fast track to access the European Union before 2030. And if that happens, then we will know that Union is quite serious about also Ukrainian membership.
Also, we talked a little bit about security and defense. I mean, obviously there is a connection to Russia and irrelevance. Just a few days ago, we have this announcement, 18th sanctions package. Maybe no surprise, already being braked by Hungary and also Slovakia, but there's a bit of a mixed signals here, right? Slovakia has said, well, hang on, we might do a deal here. So what do you think? Is this another tactic? How do you see this next package play out? And what's in the package? How is it any different?
It's actually very interesting, this entire game around the 18th package against Russia with sanctions. Those sanctions are, for example, for energy. The problem with this is that this is déjà vu, right? We have Viktor Orban who's coming, like, no, maybe yes at the end of the day, maybe no, but he's negotiating terms of the deal. Slovakians have never vetoes anything in the European Council. So they are doing some problems, but at the end of the day, they are going to be probably on the safe side. But Hungarians, this is the real problem here. So what are the terms of negotiations between the Hungarians and the rest? Well, it seems that Hungarians are a bit left out because Trump in the US with the Europeans, at least they are having a little moment right now after The Hague, and there's some understanding between the Europeans and the Americans. So Viktor Orban, who is the Trump card in the European Union, maybe he's going to be a bit softer this time than before.
All right, so we'll see how it plays out. But I think, as you said, negotiation might be possible in the end, as it always seems to be with Hungary. Let's also talk about major issue of the day. That's the Middle East, Iran, Israel. That's going to be massive. I mean, this is putting a lot of EU states in a precarious position. I mean, what kind of leverage can the EU right now do? And I'm curious about this association agreement with Israel. I mean, that's sort of hanging in the balance. I mean, they've suspended something similar in the past with Syria. I mean, does the EU carry on with this? How does it play out?
Look, there are two cornerstone foreign affairs areas where the European diplomacy has been successful over last 15 years. One is Western Balkans, and second is Iran. And all those deals that we have had with Iran on its nuclear program were managed by big countries, and in the center was always the High Representative for EU foreign policy. So that's exactly what's going on here. Europeans have this diplomacy possibility to talk with the Iranians, also because we are not bombing Iranians. I would say this is also the problem for Ursula von der Leyen, who was so pro-Israel in her statements, but everybody else, including big guns in the European Union, Germany, not Hungary, but Germany, France, Poland, also Spain, Italy, were more reserved. So right now, Iranians and Israelis and Americans, they need somebody who can come in and negotiate some kind of truce, because the truce is there, but the terms of longer peace or truce is very important, because look, there's no trust between Israel and Iran. There's very little trust towards Iran regime out there. So we need to engage with Iran to make sure that the nuclear program is not restarting. But
at the same time, I mean, a little bit awkward. I mean, we've heard you said big guns. So Chancellor Merz of Germany come out very much publicly and say that he has actually praised Israel for what they've done, saying that Israel is doing the dirty work that we don't want to do. I mean, that must complicate things on the European level.
That must complicate things. But if Merz is saying words like this is a particular German take, and this applies to von der Leyen as well, to any German politician out there, the very close relationship that the Germans have with Israel. The same kind of relationship that Americans have with Israel. Nobody else has that kind of relationship for historical reasons. And from that perspective, I understand what Chancellor Merz is saying publicly, but at the same time, it's not putting Germany in the same category as United States that actively engaged in this conflict. And right now, Merz can take a step back and say, look, we don't trust Iranians. We know what's going on over there, but we still need to engage so it doesn't start again, and we don't see the same problems down the road, a couple of years down the road.
Mm-hmm. Also, stay with Merz for a moment, because he said, I think it was also yesterday on the sidelines of the NATO summit, that he's very much involved. He wants that 18th sanctions package to pass. He's already, I think, stepped out and reached out to President Trump. Do you think now a more, let's say, engaged Germany on a European level, is that going to push and convince Hungary faster to ease their bloc?
That's a very good question on what kind of relationship we have between Merz and Orban, because there was no chemistry between the previous chancellor. However, it's very important also to notice that Europeans were not able to pinpoint to Trump about energy, what's going on in the energy sector right now with those skyrocketing prices out there, and Europeans want to put a cap on this, and America says, nah, it's not going to happen. So Merz also, he doesn't have that much leverage on Trump as probably he would like us to know. Rutte, on the other side, with this text, though, is showing us how to manage the President of the United States.
Right. Well, it's showing us one way. Let's see if other leaders will follow. But just before we close, I want to get your take. I mean, we're very much at the very tail end of the rotating council presidency of Poland, 6 months almost up now. What do you make of it? A success? What's your assessment here just at the end?
Normalcy. This is the council presidency that brought back the boredom, if you like, and this is what the EU needs, because EU needs to operate in a certain way that it has been operating for many, many years. And having this tremendously complicated world out there, internally in Europe and outside Europe, with all those changes, we need to have the system working and the system providing answers. So with this Polish presidency, providing peaceful and trustful negotiations between member states is actually a positive step from the past, because we've seen the previous presidency not having much trust in the council, and that was a big problem for thematic issues on environment, on pharmaceuticals that were postponed for later, and now the Poles will just push on the baton to Danes. Denmark takes over on July 1st, and it will just continue. So Poles brought back presidency, but was there any hype? Hype was there until 20th of January, and then Donald Trump took it over.
Right. So, but as you said, Poland has restored a bit of that system. Poland was good for Europe. So we'll leave it at that one. Look, thanks for that insight, Piotr Kaczyński there. Thanks for coming in here.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but stay tuned. Much more coming up right here on TVP World. Goodbye.